Hi, it's the Florida Law Guy. On April 20th, 2023, Governor Ron Desantis signed into law a new death penalty statute in the state of Florida. It's highly controversial, and today I'm going to tell you my opinion about it. In 1972, the United States Supreme Court declared that the death penalty was unconstitutional. However, in 1976, a more conservative court restored the death penalty, and starting in 1979, the state of Florida began to once again execute people. Florida has a history of creating troublesome capital punishment laws that have had serious constitutional issues. In 2016, in Hearst v. State, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a unique to Florida death penalty statute that allowed for judges and not juries to determine the aggravating factors justifying a death sentence. In response, Florida passed a new death penalty statute that was contrary to the basic bedrock of due process and our nation's long history of requiring unanimous verdicts in criminal cases. Instead, only 10 of the 12 jurors needed to vote for death. That new statute was also struck down in 2016 as being unconstitutional, but this time by the Florida Supreme Court. In 2017, the Florida Legislature amended its capital sentencing laws again in order to comply with the previous rulings by the U.S. and Florida Supreme Courts requiring unanimity. However, in January 2020, the Florida Supreme Court in State v. Poole did a 180 and reversed itself, saying that they were wrong 3 years earlier when they said a unanimous verdict would be required. What changed? There are 6 judges and a Chief Justice on the Florida Supreme Court. Since Ron DeSantis became governor in 2017, he has appointed 6 justices to the Florida Supreme Court. 2 of his appointees were later appointed to lifetime terms on the federal bench by President Donald Trump. There are now 0 members on the Florida Supreme Court who were appointed by a Democrat governor. On April 20th, 2023, emboldened by their new right-wing Florida Supreme Court, the Florida Legislature and Ron DeSantis passed the most troubling death penalty statute in the country. The new law once again no longer required a unanimous verdict to impose death. However, in their bloodlust, they lowered the threshold from 10 votes to only 8 votes. No other state in the country allows for this. So if 4 people vote against death, a person can still receive the death penalty. And remember, in order to be allowed to even sit on a case involving the death penalty, the jury must be first death qualified. This means that if someone was opposed to the death penalty for legal, moral, political, or religious reasons, they are not allowed to even sit on the jury. Not only that, but Florida also expanded the death penalty to include this as a punishment for capital sexual battery committed against children under 12. The state passed this law, even though in 2008 the United States Supreme Court has already held that it was unconstitutional for a person to be sentenced to death for this crime. The Florida Legislature should not be passing laws that are unconstitutional. However, now that Donald Trump has similarly stacked the United States Supreme Court, Florida is gambling that despite precedent, the new right-wing U.S. Supreme Court will uphold this new draconian law. It is important to realize that people are routinely convicted of capital sexual battery without any physical evidence, often solely on the word of a small child. Since 1979, Florida has executed 101 prisoners. Since that time, 30 people on death row have been proven innocent. 1 out of every 3 people convicted to die have been proven innocent. And yet DeSantis wants to make it easier to kill people. It is ironic that DeSantis and the Florida Legislature considers themselves to be pro-life. I wonder when Florida eventually executes their first woman for having an abortion if they will continue to call themselves pro-life. Meanwhile, poor people and minorities continue to be more likely to be executed than rich white people. Violent crime is not reduced nor deterred. The expense of numerous appeals and to execute a person on death row is much more expensive to Florida taxpayers than to impose a life imprisonment sentence. And jurors are required to become accomplices in the taking of a human life. And instead of inspiring the world, the United States continues to execute people at a similar rate to the oppressive regimes of Saudi Arabia and China, tainting its reputation as the shining city on the hill. It's completely free, so please support my mission to help make Florida law simple for the public to understand by liking and clicking the subscribe button. The way YouTube's algorithms work, the more likes and subscriptions a channel gets, the easier it is for others to be able to find it. So by subscribing, you'll also be helping others. Thanks for watching. See you next time.